I'm going to analyze MrBeast's business to prove that he is a billionaire. MrBeast has 4 major revenue sources: YouTube, merch, MrBeast Burger, and Feastables. Over the last 12 months, his main channel brought in 5.4 billion views, gaming brought in 2.5 billion views, and Reacts brought in 1.5 billion views for a whopping total of 9.4 billion views. Assuming YouTube pays him $5 per 1,000 views, his channels brought in $47 million from AdSense alone. He also makes money from brand deals, of which he had 7 on his main channel, 11 on gaming, and 3 on Reacts. Companies typically pay $20 to $30 per 1,000 views, which seems like a reasonable estimate for MrBeast, given that ads coming directly from him are more effective than a normal business ad. Assuming MrBeast charges $20 per 1,000 views, at an average of 70 million views per video, a brand would pay $1.4 million on the main channel. Multiply that by 7 sponsors, and you get $9.8 million over the last 12 months. At an average of 30 million views per video on gaming, a brand would pay $600,000. 600,000 times 11 is 6.6 million. An average of 20 million views per video on Reacts would result in a brand paying $400,000. Multiply that by 3, and you get 1.2 million. I haven't included MrBeast Shorts, MrBeast 2, and Philanthropy because YouTube pays next to nothing for Shorts. MrBeast 2 only has 15 million views, and Philanthropy is a part of MrBeast's officially registered charity, which is a separate entity and does not contribute revenue to his business. But wait, there's more. MrBeast launched international versions of his channels by translating his content into different languages, primarily Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian. All these channels have been uploading for less than a year, and they're already raking in serious views. Here's a list of his international channels and their view counts, and this is just the beginning. He has more languages in the works, such as Hindi and Japanese. His total international view count is 3.7 billion in under 12 months. The RPMs for international audiences tend to be much lower than Western countries, so he probably receives about 50 cents per 1,000 views. This would result in $1.85 million from AdSense, a relatively small amount, but a good investment for the future, given that RPMs will grow substantially in developing countries over the next decade. And there isn't much work involved in producing these videos, since it's dubbed content. His earnings from YouTube are $47 million from his English channels, $17.6 million from sponsors, and $1.85 million from his international channels, totaling $66.2 million. Number 2, merch sales. We can estimate this by looking at monthly traffic on shopmrbeast.com and by estimating the average order value and conversion rate. Average order value, or AOV for short, is the amount of money customers spend on average if they place an order on your website, and conversion rate is the number of people who bought something divided by the total number of website visitors. Industry standards for average order value for e-commerce clothing brands is anywhere from $58 to $194, with a good average being about $97. So let's use that number. Average conversion rates for clothing brands are around 5.9%. Given that MrBeast doesn't promote his merch very often, I would expect that nearly all of his website traffic comes from his most loyal followers, so a lot of people probably buy something. Therefore, the conversion rate is probably a lot higher than average. I would estimate about 8%. According to SimilarWeb, ShopMrBeast.com received about 488K monthly visitors on average over the last 3 months. We can multiply 488,000 visitors times 0.08 times 97 to get 3.79 million in monthly revenue, and multiply by 12 to get $45.48 million over the last 12 months. Number 3, MrBeast Burger. Jimmy announced that he had sold over 1 million sandwiches in under 2 months. Prices for sandwiches and burgers range from $5.49 to $13.99, and that's without any add-ons. Let's assume the average sandwich costs $9. That would result in $9 million in revenue in under 2 months on sandwiches alone, which doesn't include revenue from sides such as fries and drinks. I'm estimating the other menu items bring in about 20% of the sandwich revenue, which would be $1.8 million. This brings the total up to $10.8 million, or $5.4 million per month. At this pace, MrBeast Burger would bring in $5.4 million times 12, which is $64.8 million annually. Though I'm not sure this is a reasonable estimate for revenue over the last 12 months. On one hand, revenue from the first 2 months of business is substantially inflated due to the hype surrounding MrBeast Burger's enormous launch. Aside from the video MrBeast released announcing his new business, he got tons of press online from everyone reacting to his announcements and trying the burgers out themselves. On the other hand, he launched with 300 locations across 35 US states, and he now has over 1,000 locations across the US, Canada, and UK, suggesting that monthly revenue today is substantially higher than when MrBeast's burger first launched. Nearly all of the 300 locations ran out of food on the first night and continued to struggle to meet their demand over the first month, so the first 2 months could have even higher monthly revenues. Therefore, I think the monthly revenue numbers are higher now, but how do we estimate them? The key is the number of locations. MrBeast Burger was doing $5.4 million per month with 300 locations, which is $18,000 per location per month. As the number of locations increase, chances are that revenue per location is going to decrease because there are probably multiple locations that can service certain regions, especially in the US. For example, if I try to place an order from Seattle, there are 4 different locations I could order from. This wasn't the case when MrBeast first launched, so fewer locations were competing for business, which results in higher revenue per location. However, MrBeast wouldn't open additional locations unless demand was rising, so the revenue per location shouldn't go down too much. Otherwise, the first 300 restaurants would be upset that they're losing business to new locations. I'm going to assume a 30% drop in revenue per location as they scale to over 1,000 locations, and the exact number of locations is unknown, so we'll just assume there are 1,000 locations. A 30% drop from 18,000 takes us down to 12,600 per location per month. Multiply that by 1,000 locations to get 12.6 million per month. Yes, that's right. I think MrBeast Burger is doing around $12.6 million per month.
When I used to make like $1 a day, I saved up for months and I bought a microphone. Way worse than this microphone.
You come a long way, Jimmy. Now, we know MrBeast Burger was doing $5.4 million per month when it first launched in December 2020, and we think he's doing $12.6 million per month now. So, how do we estimate revenue for the last 12 months? Revenue doesn't explode from $5.4 million to $12.6 million overnight, and locations don't go straight from 300 to 1,000. This is difficult to estimate, so let's assume that we were at $5.4 million per month in March 2021, and that it increased linearly each month to get to $12.6 million in March 2022. You guys remember y equals mx plus b, right? It's time to find the slope. 12.6 million minus 5.4 million divided by 12 equals 0.6 million. So that means that revenue increased by $0.6 million per month. That would mean that monthly revenue in April 2021 was $6 million, May 2021 was $6.6 million, and so on, until we get to $12.6 million in March 2022. Add it all up and we get $111.6 million in revenue over the last 12 months. Number 4. Feastables. We can estimate Feastables revenue the same way we did the merch, by looking at website traffic. The cheapest option is a 10-pack for $30 with a $5 shipping charge. So the average order value, AOV, let's assume $40, because some of you ordered as many chocolate bars as you could in hopes of getting a golden ticket. I have no idea how to estimate the conversion rate because there aren't any industry standards for real-life Willy Wonka chocolate brands. So I'm going with 3%, which is fairly average for e-commerce. Monthly traffic is... Holy smokes, that's a lot of traffic! Let's average out those 3 months of data to get 4.2 million monthly visits. Using the same formula as before, we can calculate average monthly revenue like this. 4.2 million visits times 0.03 conversion rate times 40 equals 5.04 million. Feastables launched in January, so they've been around for 4 months. Therefore, total revenue to date is 5.04 million times 4 equals 20.16 million. And a full year would be 5.04 million times 12 equals 60.48 million at this rate. Although there is a huge spike anytime MrBeast announces something new, which leads to higher revenue, I believe MrBeast can offset the impending revenue drop by expanding distribution throughout retail stores, which is in the works. Feastables has some retail partners already, but so far it has been minimal with limited availability at Walmart and GoPuff, so I didn't bother trying to calculate revenue there. Feastables has a lot of room to grow in retail, and I think they can maintain the same $5.04 million monthly revenue over the next 8 months, bringing their 12-month revenue forecast to $60.48 million, though it's only $20.16 million so far. That brings total revenue over the last 12 months to a $243.44 million. Now you might be thinking, that's incredible, but it's not $1 billion. So how is Jimmy a billionaire? To be a billionaire, your total assets have to be valued at over $1 billion. You do not need $1 billion of revenue or profit annually for your company to be worth $1 billion. We're going to use the revenue number to figure out what the company is worth. MrBeast runs his company like it's a high-growth tech startup, which means that he cares about growth, not profitability. So, let's look at his growth. From April 2020 to March 2021, he generated 6.69 billion views, resulting in 39 million from AdSense and sponsors, 21.6 million from MrBeast Burger, and 32.5 million from merch, for a total of 93.1 million. His current annual revenue is more than 2.6 times the previous 12 months, which is 160% year-over-year growth. That growth rate is insane for a company his size, even in the tech world. Let's compare this with startups that are worth over $1 billion. Aviatrix is a tech company that did 40 million in 2021 and plans to do 100 million in 2022. If they hit those numbers, that would be 150% year-over-year growth, similar to MrBeast's growth rate, but with much smaller revenues. They are not profitable. Want to guess what they're worth? $2 billion. Well, tech companies typically get higher valuation because there's a larger barrier to entry. Even though MrBeast runs his company like a high-growth tech startup, he isn't one. Okay, let's compare it to a non-tech company. Glossier is a beauty brand that sells makeup and skincare products. They did 147 million in 2021, up 23% from 2020 revenue of around 120 million. Much lower growth in revenue than MrBeast. I couldn't find out they are profitable, but when a reporter asked their CEO this question, she declined to answer, which probably means that they are not profitable. At their last round of funding in July 2021, they were valued at $1.8 billion. MrBeast's business exceeds these billion-dollar companies in every relevant metric. And I didn't even value his app business because it doesn't have revenue yet. However, high-growth companies that aren't profitable are only worth something because they plan to turn a profit in the future. I'm not sure that's the case for MrBeast. If Jimmy continues to spend everything he earns to make bigger and better videos in perpetuity, his business will never turn a profit. So is MrBeast's business worth nothing or billions? It depends on who owns it. If I could buy a tiny piece of MrBeast's business at $1 billion valuation, I probably wouldn't do it if Jimmy never plans on turning a profit, because I never get my money back. However, if a large private equity firm or billionaire were to buy MrBeast's entire business while keeping Jimmy on board as an employee to film videos, it would certainly be worth over $1 billion to them, because they could restructure the business to focus on profitability. It's difficult to assign a value to private companies, and I don't know exactly what this business is worth. But it's certainly worth more than $1 billion, making Jimmy Donaldson the youngest self-made billionaire in the world.